Hello everyone, this is Mr. Davis, and this is going to be your photosynthesis review and practice video. What you're going to see here is me going through photosynthesis one time, and you're going to stop every once in a while to write down and answer some questions in your unit notebook. To start things off, just a little bit of talking. Photosynthesis makes food for plants, ferns, green algae, and this also includes plants underwater. It takes place inside the chloroplast. And remember, this is an organelle that is only in plants. It's not in animals. So chloroplast makes food. But what is food? So we want to remember food is two things. Food is energy, and food is also structure. And it's the second part that many people forget, I believe. But you don't want to forget that food provides both energy and structure, because without both of those things, you wouldn't be able to do work. Like if you're an animal, you wouldn't be able to move around and think, but you also wouldn't be able to build your own body. Okay? And plants need energy to work, but they also need something to build themselves out of. Before going on, please answer these two questions on page 13 in your new unit notebook. Just simply title the page Photosynthesis Practice, and I'm going to need you to please write the whole question down. So write the whole question and then go ahead and fill in the blank on your unit notebook as well. So please pause the video right now for a few moments while you write down these questions and answer them, and then when you're done, come back to the video and push play. Okay, so photosynthesis can be broken down into two groups of chemical reactions. The first one is going to be the light-dependent reaction. And it's called light-dependent because its energy source is the sun itself. And then we have the light-independent reaction. Now this reaction does not need light, but it does need energy. And it's going to get its energy from the powerhouse of the cell. You know that as ATP. And the light-independent reaction is also known as the Calvin cycle. Okay, so you're going to need to know both of these on your assessment. The light-independent reaction is also known as the Calvin cycle. Okay, so here's our little tiny picture of the chloroplast. Now remember, the chloroplast would be inside a plant cell. So they're very, very small, and a plant cell would be full of many, maybe dozens or maybe even hundreds of chloroplasts. So you can see I've got my chloroplast divided into the light-independent side and a light-independent side. So let's go ahead and start with the light-dependent, and we know that the sunshine has to be shining for the light-independent or light-dependent one to work, And what it's hitting here is something called the chloroplast. The chlorophyll. Okay, excuse me. So the little tiny thing that is hitting inside the chloroplast is the pigment called chlorophyll. And once the sunlight hits the chlorophyll, it becomes energized. So microscopically, it's literally at a higher energy state. So it's taking the sun's energy and turning it into actual motion energy. What then happens is we have water filling the plant and filling the cells and organelles. That will enter the chloroplast, but upon meeting the shaking chlorophyll will break up. Okay? And that's going to cause energy to be released to power some protein inside the chlorophyll. And what that is going to do is it's going to produce our powerhouse of the cell, ATP. Now ATP is going to enter into the Calvin cycle, and it's going to run a series of chemical reactions that feed off one another. Okay, so now we know that the Calvin cycle has ATP to act as a source of energy, but the Calvin cycle now also needs a source of stuff, something to build the plant out of. And the something that matter is going to come from is CO2 from the atmosphere. When CO2 enters the chloroplast and gets attached by some proteins inside there, and ATP energizes those proteins, it's going to rip apart the CO2 molecules into their individual carbons and oxygens. So these atoms are going to be now free to be built into some new molecules, and it's those molecules that are then going to go on to be able to power and to build the rest of the plant. And now finally what you're going to see on the end of the Calvin cycle is as ATP meets some new proteins, those proteins are going to start to put together the final products of photosynthesis. And you learned a long time ago that these are called carbohydrates, and specifically they're going to be spitting out a whole bunch of glucose molecules. And you learned that glucose is going to come together to make starch, and that's the energy source that the plant will use. But it's also going to make something called cellulose, and that is the structure, the building blocks that the plant now is going to use to be able to build its cell parts. And now finally we're at the end. So in a moment, please pause this video and go back to page 3 in your unit notebook and record each of these, the rest of the questions, 3 through 8. Please write down the entire question and then also answer that in the unit notebook. And if you get stuck, that's when you need to raise your hand and ask Mr. Davis for help. But you can also go back and rewind the video and start where you need to find some information, so you can review that on your own as well. But first, were your answers for number 2 and 3 that you wrote before correct? I went over those in the video before, so if you have no idea if you have those correct or not, this would be a good time to re-watch some parts of that video. Otherwise, please pause the video for the last time and write down these questions and answer them and ask Mr. Davis for help.